And it can be very powerful. Very powerful. What makes the farmer work all spring and toil all summer? His vision of the harvest. If he couldn't see the harvest, he wouldn't put the plow in the ground. If he couldn't visualize the opportunity, the chance to cash in and to turn wheat into money and money into lifestyle, if you couldn't see all of this, why would you put the plow to the soil? And the answer is, of course, why? If you can't see, why labor? And if the promise isn't clear, why put out the effort? So one of the ways to get people to respond, to put out the effort, to read the books, make the decisions, whatever it is you want them to do, part of the key is to offer the solution and be able to paint it in no uncertain terms. Jesus said to his disciples one day, if you'll stick with me and plant the roots deep in our Christian ideology, this philosophy, he said, if you will walk the streets, if you'll pour your heart and soul into this enterprise, if you will touch every human you can touch, if you'll cross the oceans, if you will fling yourself on the known world, and it isn't going to be easy, spreading the ideas, spreading what we've been going through the last 3.5 years. He said it isn't going to be an easy task, but he said, I promise you, after you have finished this rather difficult task of putting all of your energy, time, and effort into the enterprise, he said, I promise you, when it's finished, in my Father's house are many mansions. Wow. See, that's clever. He put the mansion shot on him. No wonder they walk the streets. All you have to do is read the book of the activities. And they crossed the oceans, they walked the streets, they touched every human they could touch. They put every ounce of energy and mind and soul and spirit into this philosophy. And they did it right up until the time they forfeited their life, most of them, for the opportunity. No wonder it's lasted for 2,000 years. But the enterprise also had the promise. And wouldn't you put out some effort if somebody that was credible told you about such a unique promise? And the answer is, of course. All we have to do is to see the promise clearly enough, and we will do some amazing things. Became a pretty good presenter. Show taught me well. I used to hear people say, I've listened to a lot of salesmen, but you've got to be one of the best. I thought, wow, the man has taught me well. Somebody else would say, hey, I've been around, I think I've heard them all, but wow, you've got to be the best. You're one of the greatest salesmen I've ever heard. And I thought, wow, I've learned this stuff pretty quickly. Then one day the awful truth dawned on me. I thought, hey, wait a minute. Something's wrong here. If I'm one of the world's all-time great salesmen, how come they ain't buying? Wow. It started to dawn on me that I had an additional skill to learn. I got very good at presentation. I had yet to get good at persuasion. There were two great orators of antiquity. One was Demosthenes. He was a Greek. The other was Cicero. Cicero was a Roman. And they were both great speakers. But it was said of Cicero, when he spoke, everybody said, what a great speech. It was said of Demosthenes, when he spoke, everybody said, let us march. And that's the difference between presentation and persuasion. I'm asking you to learn this additional skill. We call you a good persuader if now the results start to follow. If something starts to happen, if people decide, if they actually do something about your presentation, if they do something about your appeal, if something happens, now we know you have truly become what we call a persuader. So let's talk about the art of persuasion and what all it entails. Let me give it to you. Here's number one. Be a good storyteller. If you're involved in a company that deals in numbers and business and products and volume of business, make sure you translate all the business into stories. Sometimes it's easy to say, we did $10 million in business last month. And then we forget the stories that are involved in that 10 million. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Become story conscious as well as figure conscious. How many stories does $10 million represent? And if you're only interested in the numbers and not the stories, you'll be limited in your future skills of communication. Try to translate activity and business and volume and money and numbers into people's lives and stories and who all is involved in the transactions. Okay? Now here's another key. Become your own best storyteller. Learn to tell your own story. Whether it's identification, logic, solutions. Be a student of your own life. It's so important to go back over your own life. It's good to review at the end of the day your experiences of the day. We call it learning to reflect. One of the keys of making the past more valuable to invest it in the future is learning how to reflect. And let me give you some good times to reflect. One is at the end of the day. Take a few minutes at the end of the day and go back over your day. Who did you see, and who did you meet, and who did you talk to, and what happened? Why did they say what they said, and why did you say what you said? We call it running the tapes again. And if you'll take a few minutes at the end of the day and run the tapes of the day again, that day will take a more important place in your equity future. You'll be able to draw from that day. But if you casually go through the day, and then if you casually miss the opportunity to lock that day into your consciousness, sure enough, at some future time when you could have drawn from that experience, it won't be available. Here's how to lock in your past and make it more of an equity. Number 2, take a few hours at the end of the week to go back over a week. A week is a pretty good chunk of time. The sights and the sounds and the colors and the people and the decisions and the mistakes and the errors and the successes. Just go back and review that week and let that week take a more powerful place in your awareness. A half a day at the end of the month. A month is really a good chunk of time. We wouldn't let a company go by without taking a look at least in 30 days. You can't be casual about taking a look. Somebody says, well, let's let the company go a few years and then we'll take a look. Say, no, you can't wait a few years. That would be too late. You could be so far off track. Now, I'm asking you not to let your life go more than about 30 days without taking a serious look at the numbers and what you've done and what you've said and how you've grown and your experiences, so that one more 30-day period takes a stronger place in your life. Take a weekend at the end of the year called Time to Reflect. Why? To make the past more valuable. If you treat it so, experiences can become commodity, currency, coin. Now, why try to make the past more valuable? Here's the simple answer: to invest it in the future. When my father was about to turn 76 years old, I said to him, dear Father, can you imagine the incredible experience that's waiting for you to gather up the last 75 years of your life and invest them into your 76th? See, that's a lot different awareness than just trying to make it through one more year. Let me offer you this challenge to gather up more of your past and invest it in your future. And part of it is studying your own story, because your own story could be so powerful in identifying and offering answers and solutions. No telling what, if you took a little time, you could uncover that you just haven't talked about for a long time. If you were to dig back, no telling what additional stories and experiences you could reawaken, so that when the opportunity came, you could draw from that experience and invest it into that conversation, and no telling who you could touch. And without it, it might be a touch you couldn't make and a reach for which you're too short. Stories, your story, other people's stories. What a great way to illustrate fact and ideas and philosophy is to use the stories of life, because that's the real stuff of life, the stories of life. All right, here's number 2 in the art of persuasion. Accurate facts. Accurate facts. We call it dealing in truth. Accuracy is very important. Here's why. It builds credibility. Credibility starts to weaken if you mess with the facts, the truth, the correct numbers. Now, everybody will give you room for what we call an unintentional error in dealing in facts. Now, see, if my watch says about 7:28, but if you were to ask me what time is it, and I was to say it's 7:30, you would allow me to be a couple of minutes off, right? If I said it was 7:30, but accurately, really, truthfully, it was 7:28, you would give me that error to just quickly say 7:30, right? You would say, you didn't mean to mess up my life, right? By leading me astray with this erroneous information that it was 7:30 when really it was only 7:28. Now, there are times and occasions when you may have to be precise, and it may be a life and death matter, who knows. But in generally speaking, people will give you room for making what we call an unintentional error in stating what we call the truth. But beyond a sort of reasonableness of unintentional error, an area that is what we call in higher circles unacceptable. Some people deal in exaggeration, and it starts to destroy their credibility. If you're giving testimony in a trial, and you're on the witness stand, if they catch you in one lie, guess what they do with the rest of your testimony? They throw it all away. Why? You have destroyed your credibility. The guy says, well, no, I only lied just that one time. Well, how are we going to believe that? All it takes is one to now weaken your whole testimony, right? So here's part of the key in the art of persuasion. Dealing in truth. Dealing in fact. Here's what we call true sophistication. A total absence of exaggeration. Why? It's unnecessary to the sophisticated. Here's what we call exaggeration. The childish attempt to make up for lack of self-worth. If you don't feel adequate, more often than not you tend to deal in exaggerations, to make up in numbers what you may lack in character, or what you lack in substance, or what you lack in confidence. But if you start building character and confidence and precision of thinking and decision making, and you have a sense of growing worth and value, you don't mind dealing in absolute truth and accuracy, because that's what counts. Here's the next key. Better understated than overstated. I have a book called Seasons of Life, and it's got my picture in it. And it isn't the best picture. You know, the book came out about 3 years ago. I published it myself. Every once in a while somebody says, Mr. Rohn, this picture of you in this book, Seasons of Life, is not the greatest picture of you. I said, I know, that's why it's in there. So that when I show up, I'll look better than the picture. Right, a lot of people use these glamour Hollywood shots, right? And when they show up in person, they look a little used around the edges, right? I'd rather have people surprised on the upside than surprised on the disappointing side. If you're working with people, let me give you one of the greatest clues I've learned. When you're working with people, let them find out it was more than you promised, and let them find out it was easier than you said. Later, you always want people to be surprised that it's more than you promised, and it's easier than you said. Key here, learn to trust the truth. If the truth isn't enough, then all you have to do is become stronger yourself in presenting the truth. All right, number one was stories. Number two, accuracy, facts, telling the truth. Sometimes you never know who's going to be around to check the accuracy of your stories. In one of my sessions on the weekend, in our leadership series, I was talking about a murder trial I attended many, many years ago in Houston, Texas. And I was describing this murder trial and the scene, and the lawyer who turned down the case. Then they hired another lawyer to defend this black man who had killed a bus driver. And I'm going through this whole scene. And somebody told me it was going to be quite a dramatic trial and I should go. And I happened to be in the area, so I went to this murder trial. I was there every day. And the lawyer was so brilliant. This black lawyer from Dallas was so brilliant. I was swept away by his language and his style and his uniqueness. He had the whole courtroom mesmerized. So I'm telling this whole story for some illustration I was using. And then I finished the story and I started moving on, and it was, getting close to having a break in the seminar. And when I finished the story, a lady stood up. I had a class of about 40, 50 people. She stands up. She said, Mr. Rohn, could I say something? And I thought we'd been going quite a while, and she just wanted to stand up and leave and excuse herself. And she said, could I say something? And I said, well, yes. And she looked a little sort of shaken. I said, yes, of course. She turned around to the group and she said, ladies and gentlemen, I've just had a unique experience. She said, this story that Mr. Rohn told you about this murder trial down in Houston, Texas, some 15 years ago. She said, I want you to know the experience I've had in listening to the story has been unique because I was there. She said, the attorney that turned down the case, a pretty famous attorney, she said, he happened to be my boss. I was his legal secretary. I also sat in that courtroom. I want you to know Mr. Rohn has described to you exactly what happened. And I thought, wow. Close, right? I'm asking you, right? Tell accurate stories. Deal in truth, because you never know when 15 years later somebody's going to be sitting in your audience. Okay. But learn to trust the truth. There's nothing more powerful than the truth. I got an ancient quote for you. Here's what it is. The truth will set you free. That's what sets you free. The truth. Many people are dealing in affirmations, but I'll tell you what sets you free. The truth. The best thing to affirm is the truth. If you're broke, best thing to affirm is, I am broke. That's what you put up on the refrigerator. It's the truth that sets you free. Right? When you're shaving in the morning, gentlemen, if you're broke, you just put that up there. I'm broke. There's nothing better to set you free than the awesome facts, the truth. So deal in truth. Affirmation without discipline leads to delusion. And the discipline and the accuracy of knowing your situation. You say, well, that's a bit negative. You've got to deal somewhat in negativity. If you've got something fairly wrong with your heart, looks like you're going to need a major operation, how many x-rays do you want them to take to find out what's really wrong? Somebody says, oh, just take one and see if we catch it. You say, no, not my heart. How many x-rays do you want them to take? It's kind of a negative subject, taking x-rays. How many? As many as it takes to find the full extent of the facts called the negative problem. So best to state the truth. Now we can deal with truth. Now we can deal with the problem if we accurately state it and we take an x-ray that shows it in all of its insidiousness. Now we can go after it and we can effect a cure. Now we can start the positive treatment. But at first, you got to know the problem before you can find the answer. So dealing in truth, so important. It sets you free. Next in the list of key things to remember in the art of persuasion, I've got down here quotes. You might as well borrow somebody else's good language. If they've said it extremely well and you can use it to illustrate a point, just borrow it. I borrow everything I can borrow. All the stuff Mr. Schoaf taught me, I borrow all that. You know, try my best to give him credit for all the things he shared with me. But borrow. Some people have said it so well, there's no use trying to think up another way to say it. Quotes. It shows you've done your homework. It shows you're passionately interested in your subject. The quotes, the stories. In some other seminars I give, I use a lot of quotes. I'm talking about humans being affected by each other, and I quote the lyrics from a recent song that says, if not for you, the winter would hold no spring, couldn't hear a robin sing, I just wouldn't have a clue if not for you. Now see, that's so well said, you couldn't improve much on that. So the key is to just borrow all that you can borrow to support your argument, to express your heart, or to express your mind and your feelings. This is part of the art of persuasion, learning to borrow things well said and well constructed. Winston Churchill said, the truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, and ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. See, that's so well said. You could stay up all night and not think of that, right? But you don't have to stay up all night and think of it, right? Churchill's already said it. But it's so powerful, and it's so brief, and it's so precise, and it's so dramatic that you might as well borrow the drama that comes from the language just by exercising the quote. I talk about the brevity of life in one of my other lectures. The Beatles wrote, life is so short. What a powerful lyric from one of their songs. And for John on the streets of New York, it was extra short. But see, those are powerful words. Elton John sings, she lived her life like a candle in the wind. Wow, you can't think of much better lyrics to describe how fragile life is and how brief it is. Right? Those are unique words, and the key is to learn the words and borrow the quotes to support your expressions, your communication, your conversations. Benjamin Disraeli said, nothing can resist a human will that will stake its existence on its purpose. Wow, that's powerful. We call this towering language. We call this climbing the summit of words and sentences and phrases that have incredible meaning, so briefly said and yet so powerfully done. And you might as well borrow the power and borrow the explanation and borrow the effect of somebody else's unique words. Just borrow those and put them into your presentation. You'll see the dramatic difference right away. John Kennedy said, Winston Churchill had the ability in World War II to take the English language and send it into battle. And we were all inspired by the speeches, rallied to the cause, the tenacity to hang on, the visions of the rascal, Hitler, and his insidious, casting a long shadow over the land of Europe. Churchill had the ability to use the language to get us to see and to get us to think and to stir the mind and stir the heart and stir the soul. I'm telling you, words are so powerful. And think up words of your own that are powerful, but when you need it, reach and borrow somebody who has said it well and offer it for somebody to consider, to touch the heart and touch the soul and mend the problem and get somebody to decide, to try, to move, to change, to grow. Of course, this isn't an easy task. It wasn't meant to be easy. It was meant to be a price, because that's how you appreciate the promise of language, the language that affects the cure, the language that reaches and touches. You've got to go through some of these skills, learn the craft. Now, I've got another word down here you might not have that much use for. It's called oratory. Oratory is a dramatic way of saying something to catch someone's attention, to drive the point home. And you may not have that much use for oratory. I probably use more oratory informally than I do in public. I'm a little more reserved on the platform behind a podium. I get a little more dramatic in person. It's just my style. A little more conservative in public, a little more dramatic in person. But I do have a bit of oratory. One of my lectures, I'm dealing with the problem of complaining. I go through a whole list called the diseases of attitude. And when I get to the last one, complaining, I'm wanting to really make it clear. And I say, spend 5 minutes complaining and you have wasted 5. And you may have begun what's known as economic cancer of the bone. They will soon haul you off into a financial desert and there let you choke on the dust of your own regret. Now, that's what we call a bit of oratory, right? Oratory. Just a burst, right? Now, you can't do 30 minutes of that, right? That'd be too much. But when the occasion calls for it, oratory, saying something in a more dramatic fashion,